Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our Life Science Liability presentation. Our presenter today is Nicole Carey, National Head of New Product Development and Senior Underwriter. Before we start the session today, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar will be recorded and the link will be sent to you in the next couple of days. Alternatively, it will be on our website by the end of the week. During the session, we invite you and your comments and questions. So please select the Q&A section on your screen. If you're having troubles or issues with sound, please try to disconnect and reconnect or use the call-in number provided in the audio options on your screen. If you can't see the presenters, please make sure that you're using the WebEx app and not a browser, or you're outside of your company's server. With regards to CPD and CIP points, a certificate will be emailed to you and you can claim the points online with either NEBA or ANZIF websites. We hope you enjoy the session today, and so without further delay, I'll hand you over to Nicole for today's presentation.
Thanks, Matt. So feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A section there. Matt's on standby to answer those for you if you've got anything that pops up there. So thanks for joining us this morning for all of those of you in WA, and this afternoon for everyone on the other side of the country. This is just a brief agenda to let you know what we're going to cover today. I'm going to start with who needs a life sciences insurance policy, what life sciences is according to Berkeley Insurance Australia, and then I'm going to run through an overview of what our policy actually covers, so that just to give you an idea of what coverage is available under there for you. So let's start with what is the life sciences industry. So this slide details the types of companies within the life sciences industry. I'm sure you can have a look at that and see that the list of companies and agree that there's various exposures which require coverage under a number of different insurance policies. So you've got your property insurance, your public and products liability, professional indemnity, or errors and omissions liabilities that are sitting out there and exposures. So life sciences insurance policies are combined insurance policies. That's a combined public and products liability, clinical trials, and errors and omissions policy. And it's designed to cater to and accommodate the exposures within the life sciences industry. So, and just to make sure that there's not any gaps that are sitting there if you're placing the GL with one insurer and the PI or the E&O with another insurer. So as you can see from there, the life sciences industry is very broad. It's companies that are operating in the research, development and manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, biotech-based foods and medicines, medical devices, biomedical technologies, nutraceuticals, cosmeceuticals, food processing, and other products that improve the lives of organisms. So the life sciences industry, or the life sciences according to Berkeley, isn't quite as broad as what we've said on this slide beforehand. So according to Berkeley, and this is what we like to look at when we're underwriting, products or devices that are regulated by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. So the Therapeutic Goods Administration, or the TGA, is the Australian government entity authority that's responsible for evaluating, assessing and monitoring products that are defined as therapeutic goods. And goods that are approved by the TGA are listed on the Australian Therapeutic Goods Register. So under our life sciences wording, we can cover therapeutic foods and products that are regulated by the TGA and noted on the ARTG. Now, I haven't said everything, so as with all insurance products, we can't cover every single thing that's noted on the ARTG, because there are some medical products and devices that we can't cover. However, the first step in our underwriting process for us to decide if it is a product or a device that we can cover is to have a look and make sure that it is regulated by the TGA and noted on the Therapeutic Goods Register. So I keep mentioning the word therapeutic goods, so I thought I would just give you a quick overview of what we mean by therapeutic goods. the therapeutic goods is a term that's defined in the Therapeutic Goods Act. It's some Commonwealth legislation. And a therapeutic good is defined to be a product that is or is represented to be or is likely to be taken or for which the sole or principal ordinary use is a therapeutic use or for use as an ingredient or component in the manufacture of therapeutic goods or for use as a container or part of a container for a therapeutic good. So it includes the product, it includes components within larger products, and it also includes any sort of containers that are used for those goods. So I'm just going to, as with lots of definitions in legislation, one definition leads to another one. So the term therapeutic use is also a defined term within the Therapeutic Goods Act. So we're looking at therapeutic goods, which are used for a therapeutic use. And this slide here just goes over what the definition of a therapeutic use is. So it's products for use in humans or in connection with preventing, diagnosing, curing, or alleviating a disease, ailment, defect, or injury. Influencing, inhibiting, or modifying a physiological process, testing the susceptibility of a person to a disease or ailment, influencing, controlling, or preventing conception, and testing for pregnancy. So you can see there that covers a very broad range of products, devices, medical devices, and products. Okay. So this slide just highlights the BIA's appetite for our products that we would like to look at under our life sciences wording. So the first one that we've got there are biologicals. Now, a biological is a thing that's made from or contains human cells or human tissues, and then that's used as a therapeutic use. So to treat or prevent disease, diagnose conditions, alter the physiological process of a person, replace or modify a person's body parts, fecal microbiota transplant products. That sounds a bit yuck. And it's a thing that contains or comprises living cells, tissues, or organs. So that's what biologicals are. The next that I've got on the list there is cosmetics. Now, cosmetics are generally regulated under the Australian Industrial Chemicals Introduction Scheme. However, where a cosmetic is making a therapeutic claim, they are registered by the TGA. So examples of such cosmetics that are TGA regulated are sunscreens, moisturizers that contain sunscreen, skin whitening lotion, and some tablets. So if you've got cosmetics and they're not TGA registered, then that's going to be going under our standard GL policy. But if you've got cosmetics that are TGA registered, regulated, and are listed on the Therapeutic Goods Register, that's going to fit under our life sciences policy. The next one we've got there is dietary supplements, and these are a little bit similar to cosmetics. Some dietary supplements are just classed as food. They don't have any therapeutic claims to them, so they're not actually regulated by the TGA. Those sorts of supplements we wouldn't be looking to cover under the life sciences policy, but where they are deemed to be a therapeutic good, they would be fit within our appetite for the life sciences policy. The next product we've got there are medicines, so that covers prescription and non-prescription, so that'll cover your complementary over-the-counter medicines like your vitamins and things like that, as well as pharmaceuticals that you require prescriptions for to buy. Medical devices, this is a pretty broad category, so it covers anything that's related to diagnostic, imaging, monitoring, implants and prosthetics, therapeutic devices, surgical devices, testing and processing devices, and research or clinical lab devices and software. So medical devices also includes dental applications. So if you've got dental tools or dental implants, those sorts of things, they would fit in here under the medical devices topic. Medical food, so this is a little bit different to the dietary supplements that we were talking about. So medical foods are foods that are prescribed by a doctor when a patient has a special nutrient needs to manage their disease or health conditions. And that patient is continually under the physician's ongoing care. So in Australia, medical foods are regulated by Food Standards Australia and not the TGA. So this is the only exception to our TGA rule, is that we can look to include coverage for medical foods under our life sciences policy, but we're really only going to be looking at them where those medical foods have been approved and authorized by an equivalent to the TGA. So like in the US, that would be the US Food and Drug Administration. They would they approve medical foods under their restrictions. So we can look at medical foods, even though they're not TGA regulated, but they do have to have some sort of approval or regulation from an equivalent to the TGA, like the FDA. The next three I've got on there: medical processing equipment, medical product leases, repair and maintenance. They're all pretty self-explanatory. And the other thing that we've got on there, which is not regulated by the TGA, is any animal medications. So pharmaceuticals and things that are used for to help injured or sick animals. We can consider those under our life sciences wording too. So that's medical products. The other thing that our life sciences wording can also cater to cover medical services or medical services. So the first one that we've got there are contract research organisations. So a contract research organisation is an organisation that provides specialised support to pharmaceutical and biotech companies. So examples of the services they provide include preclinical testing, clinical trials management, clinical data management, data analysis. So a CRO might provide all of these services to a pharmaceutical company, or they might just provide one or two of those services here and there. And I mean, the sole thing for the contract research organizations, with a lot of smaller pharmaceutical companies where they're starting up, they don't have the people power and the capacity to run the clinical trials and get all these things set up themselves. So they outsource those services to contract research organizations. And it helps to reduce their costs and things. The next thing that we've got on the list there are contract manufacturing organizations. So these are organizations that manufacture products on behalf of third parties. So the CMOs will receive pharmaceutical or complementary medicine specifications from a third party. And then they manufacture to those specifications on behalf of that third party. So a number of vitamin companies use contract manufacturing organizations. So you will see that you've got your Nature's Way and your Blackmores and all those sorts of companies. A lot of the time they will use contract manufacturing organizations. So sometimes you'll have the CMOs manufacturing for a number of different well-known pharmaceutical companies. And again, this just comes to size and scale. It's sometimes more cost efficient to contract that out to third-party organizations for the manufacturing. Clinical trial site organizations, similar to the above two, they're sort of an outsourced service that is provided within the life sciences industry. The clinical trial site organizations are organizations that are set up to run clinical trials on behalf of third-party sponsors. So a sponsor is a person who has the drug or the medical device that we need to run clinical trials for to test if it's safe to distribute to the broader population. So the sponsor is a person who develops all the trial protocols, so the processes and procedures that are related to the clinical trial. And the clinical trial site organization is the organization that's responsible for recruiting patients, and then they run the clinical trial on their own site in accordance with the protocol. So they're sort of set up a little bit like a hospital outpatients ward, where they've got different rooms where they can have clinical trial participants come in. If it's a drug we're testing, receive the drug, sit on site, be monitored, and then they can leave. So we can look at these clinical trial site organisations. However, given the nature of their exposure and that the product's liability exposure really sits with the clinical trial sponsor as opposed to the people that are running the clinical trial, we'd write these under our medical malpractice and our general public and products liability policy. So the other organisations that I've got down there and services, they all sort of fit within, they're pretty self-explanatory. So we've got universities and hospitals clinical trials, for and non-profit research organisations, drug discovery technology, and life science product developed organisations. So the life science product development organisations, they're again sort of a third party who will assist our product development companies to get the things to market. Like they will help with their regulatory approvals and their advertising and marketing that they might need to get those particular products to the next stage of commercialization and development. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to now. Oh, Matt, do you have a question?
We do. Gordon's basically asked, and I thought this was the opportune time to bring it in, Nicole, is that is our policy based on occurrence or a claims made wording. So if when you're going through these, if you can, because there's several different sections and the different package policies, obviously then respond on different basis, if you can cover that when you're going through it.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so now we're up to the life sciences policy. So I just want to run through what our policy covers for you. So this is just a really broad overview. The life sciences policy, it's a package policy and it's designed to cover the exposures of products and services within the life sciences industry. So it is a package policy, but individual sections can be purchased on their own. So as an example, if an insured is a sponsor of a singular new to market product, they might only want to purchase the clinical trial coverage section. On the other hand, if they're a developed company that they've got lots of products on the market, as well as they're testing new policy, testing new drugs and things, they might want to buy the full policy that's got the public and products liability for their stuff that's already got out on the market, as well as the clinical trials coverage for any new trials that they're running at the same time. So I've also added at the bottom of this slide medical malpractice policy. So I briefly mentioned it when we were talking about the clinical trial site organisations. So med mal coverage doesn't automatically fit within part of our life sciences policy wording, but it is a product that we can offer at Berkeley. And we can offer it in conjunction with our life sciences policy where it's required. So I'm going to go through each individual policy section for you separately. And I think I just wanted to touch on beforehand that our life sciences policy and our life sciences team sits within our general underwriting team. So if we get a submission that comes in that might not fit under our life sciences GL component, it's very easy for us to have a chat with our GL open market underwriters to say, hey, is this something that we would write open market under our GL policy? Similar with the PI component, we might not think it's something that fits under the life sciences E&O component, but we will definitely talk to our financial lines underwriters and say, is this something that you guys could write open market or as a med mal risk? So we're not just going to decline things and they go into an ether. We'll always have that discussion before we come back to you to let you know if we think there's a better suited policy or if we can't write it under the life sciences policy for you. Okay, so let's get started. So the first section of our policy is the products completed and operations insuring clause. So this is essentially your products liability insuring clause. It provides coverage for loss arising from bodily injury or property damage, which has been caused by the insured's product. So an example of a claim that could be covered under this section might be injury caused by an unlisted ingredient in a medicine. So there's an ingredient within the medicine that they haven't listed on their product labeling, and there's been an allergic reaction or there's been some sort of injury that's arisen out of that. Alternatively, it could even be a new injury that there's a known ingredient that for some reason it causes a known injury which people weren't aware of prior to that. Within the products liability insuring clause, we've got medical monitoring expenses. So this coverage provides coverage for medical expenses incurred to conduct medical testing or medical testing monitoring of a claimant in the absence of a physical injury. So this coverage is going to kick in where there's been a bodily injury or property damage claim, or something's come up that we know that this particular product could cause an injury to somebody. So the policy will contribute towards medical monitoring expenses just to monitor people who have been exposed to the product and where exposure to that product could create a risk of bodily injury in the future. So the clause only applies where the testing is medically warranted, because of early diagnosis of the potential bodily injury will improve the chances of beneficial medical intervention, and where the testing and monitoring provides no other material benefit to the claimant. So we're not just going to provide medical testing for the sake of it or because you've been exposed to it. There has to, if you need testing for something else, that's not going to be covered under the policy. And just to Gordon's question, this section, the products liability section, is written on a claims made and notified basis. So just to rehash, that means a claim has to be made against the insured during the policy period, and that's the policy that's in place at the time that will respond. So the next section we've got under the policy is the premises or ongoing operations liability section. This section is written on an occurrence basis, and this is basically your public liability insuring clause. So where the insured's liable for bodily injury or property damage that's caused by an accident or their negligence on the insured's premises or because of the insured's operations. So your slip and fall type accident, that's what this insuring clause is going to be covering. The next coverage section that we've got under the policy is the medical payments. This insuring clause actually links back to the public and products liability or the public liability insuring clause. And it just extends the definition of damages to make sure that we are confirming that we're covering medical expenses that might arise after somebody has suffered an injury under the premises of the public liability insuring clause. So this just confirms that first aid costs will be covered, medical and dental services, and any ambulance, hospital, or nursing or funeral services would be covered under this clause if there was so required to be paid. So the next insuring clause is yet two insuring clauses. It's a combined one, is your advertising injury and your personal injury claims. So these are fairly standard clauses within a public and products liability insurance policy. So your advertising injury is injury that's caused by where you've infringed someone's copyright or you've breached your misleading and deceptive conduct provisions in any of your advertising or publicity or broadcasting or on your internet websites. So an example of a misleading and deceptive conduct claim, which could lead to compensatory damages, could include an instance where a company has failed to note a known allergen that might be included within their product. So an example of this was Pharmacare Laboratories, who a few years ago failed to note that their Nature's Way Kids Smart Fighter Gummies fish oil products could contain milk or milk products. So there was an ingredient warning on the label, which related to the presence of gluten, fish, sugars, soybean products, a whole heap of other things. However, they didn't note that it could contain milk or milk products, and it wasn't listed in the warning. So unfortunately, the products did include some milk proteins and as an inactive ingredient, and at least two children suffered severe anaphylactic reactions that required medical intervention. So if there was some compensatory damages that came in as a result of that sort of example, that's where this clause would kick in to provide some cover. The next clause is, I've just got the definition of personal injury in here. So again, pretty standard clause within a A GL policy, it's covering your false arrest, malicious prosecution, libel and slander, defamation, or breaches of privacy. So, okay. So those clauses that I've spoken to generally basically cover off what's your standard public and products liability insurance policy. So the next section of our policy that we go into is the clinical trial coverage. And this is where we start veering away from a standard GL policy. So clinical trial coverage is generally purchased by the entity who is developing the medical device or product, and they're normally referred to as a sponsor. So it's the sponsor that is normally responsible for purchasing the clinical trial coverage. If you've got a sponsor who's using a clinical trial site organization, if there's bodily injury or property damage that arises from that product or device, that will come back to the clinical trials policy that the sponsor has in place, not the med-mal policy that the clinical trials site organization has in place. Okay, so this section is appropriate for phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. So they're basically the first 3 phases that all products have to go through to be tested, to be approved by the TGA. When you get to phase 4, that's when the product's been tested and it's okay and it's out into the general population, which is essentially a very long-term clinical trial that goes on. So the clinical trial insuring clause provides coverage to an insured for claims arising from the performance of a clinical trial. So there are a number of coverage sections within this insuring clause, and starting with the no fault compensation and the bodily injury and property damage and personal injury sections. So both of these sections basically provide coverage for the same thing, which is claims arising from bodily injury, property damage, or personal injury that's arising from an individual's participation in a clinical trial. So the difference is between the 2 sections is the mechanism of payment or determining how compensation will be paid. So under the no fault compensation insuring clause, which is the first insuring clause, the determination of payment from compensation is guided by a set of pre-agreed guidelines. So I've got 2 different examples there. There's the Medicine Australian Compensation Guidelines and the Medical Technology Association of Australia Compensation Guidelines. And so what these guidelines normally do is compensation is normally payable regardless of whether the participant can prove the company has been negligent in their research and development or that the product is defective. So they suffer an injury, they say, I got the injury because I was in the clinical trial, and then the sponsor basically has to pay up. The individual that suffered the loss doesn't have to prove that they suffered that injury as a result of the insured's negligence. So payment made by a sponsor under the guidelines is made without an admission of liability. So the participant doesn't have to prove that the sponsor has been negligent, and the sponsor doesn't have to admit any liability. Payment under these ones is generally required that if a trial participant is accepting payment under the no fault compensation clause, that it's a full and final settlement, and they can't sort of bring another action after that. But it is important to note that just because a clinical trial follows the compensation guidelines, the participant is not restricted to make their claim under the guidelines. So a participant can still bring a claim and pursue another alternative legal remedy outside of the guidelines. And that's where the second insuring clause comes from. So the important thing to note when looking at the 2 clauses is it's one or the other. So the participant can take the payment under the no fault compensation guidelines, or they can institute legal proceedings, which would have the standard, you would have to prove negligence, and there would have to be liability, and that would have to not necessarily be admitted, but it would have to be proven for the policy to be paid under that second insuring clause.
And Nicole, that would be a fair difference between a standard GL policy and the clinical trials coverage, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely that no fault compensation clause, that's not something that you would normally have under a standard GL policy. The second part of it is fairly standard. Someone has to make a claim, they have to prove they was negligent to get the payment, but the no fault compensation part is not part of a standard GL policy. So the next insuring clause that we've got under the clinical trials policy is abuse and molestation damages. So this is a sublimited coverage where there's an allegation that the insured is liable based upon their negligent employment, investigation, supervision, or retention of a person for whom the insured was legally responsible at the time the abuse or molestation occurred. So it's not your traditional abuse or molestation coverage. It's more of sort of a management one saying, hey, you guys didn't follow the right procedures and guidelines and you've let this person be employed by you and they have committed this act. So that's where this one kicks in. So there's a number of restrictions to coverage. There always is with abuse and molestation claims. The main one is that the insured didn't participate in the abuse and that they reported the abuse or molestation as soon as they sort of became aware of it. Medical stop loss expenses. So these are the expenses incurred for the treatment administered to a clinical trial participant at the time of or after an approved trial. So if something's happened during the clinical trial and a participant needs medical treatment, this is where the coverage for that would kick in, is under the medical stop loss coverage. So the medical expenses that we're talking about here aren't sort of the normal medical expenses that would be expected. So if they're trying a drug, for example, that could cause a little bit of pain and they say you need to take some Panadol, it's not going to be covering those sorts of medical expenses. It's more the unexpected medical expenses that could be incurred. The medical monitoring expenses is very similar to the medical monitoring expenses under the GL coverage. So if there's been a trial and they've worked out there is something wrong with the drug or the device, and it could cause injury further down the track, that's where these expenses coverage will kick in to just to make sure to follow up. It's basically doing the right thing to say, you guys have volunteered to participate in your trial. We're going to make sure that you're okay and you're not going to suffer any injuries as a result of that. So that's a sort of very quick, brief overview of what the clinical trial coverage is, but that's it there. So that section can be purchased on its own without the public and products liability. The next section we've got is the errors and omissions liability coverage. So this is covering financial loss claims which are arising from an unintentional act, error, or omission on the insured's part, which has caused their product to become defective, or their work to be performed in a manner inconsistent with their written agreement for services. So the coverage provided under this E&O extension within our life sciences wording is a lot broader than what we would normally cover under our GL policy. Our GL policy is a manufacturing errors and omissions coverage only, whereas this one is it's for the services as well. So not all insureds will need to purchase this coverage section. It's much less of an exposure when an insured's manufacturing their own product, as opposed to the insured if they're a contract manufacturing organisation. This is going to be more important for that contract manufacturing organisation because they're developing the products on behalf of a third person. And sometimes they're using component products of somebody else's and could potentially cause damage and things to those there. So in a similar manner to what I said earlier about the GL policy, if we don't think it's something that would fit under our life sciences policy, if we receive a submission for an insured who provides pure professional services, we might make the decision that our miscellaneous PI policy is more suitable for those insureds. So an example is a clinical laboratory. That's something that we would write under our standard PI miscellaneous wording. We wouldn't write that under the errors and omissions section of our life sciences wording. Another one that we've had is an example was a sonographer who was providing advice to a company that was running clinical trials about the types of imaging machinery that they should use during the clinical trials. That's not really a life sciences exposure. That's them just acting in their capacity as a sonographer providing that advice. So that would have been under the med-mal policy as opposed to the life sciences policy. Okay. These are some additional coverage sections. I've just sort of bunched them all together because I think a lot of them are sort of fairly standard within a GL policy. We've got the care, custody and control sublimit. So property damage to somebody else's property that is in your possession at the time. This is sublimited, similar manner to the way we sublimit under our GL policy. If you've got an insured who has a lot of property in their care, custody and control, that should probably be covered under a property liability policy, not the GL policy. Product withdrawal expenses. So it's an expenses coverage and it's expenses associated with a class 1 product recall. So the product recall in relation to this one, it can be taken on a voluntary basis by the insured or as required by a government entity. So if it's a government ordered product recall, that's fine. If it's a voluntary one, so if the insured becomes aware of an issue that could cause serious injury or death as one of their products and the government hasn't quite got around to issuing the government recall yet, there is coverage under the policy where the insured makes that decision to do that themselves. Because it's in the best interest moving forward anyway. That's again a sublimited coverage. Sorry, I'm just going to say I've been doing a lot of talking. So the next section that we've got is data breach expenses coverage. So this is a sublimited coverage which will provide expenses coverage to the insured where an unintentional act or omission on part of the insured has caused a disclosure of protected personal information or where the insured has failed to protect such information from access or use by any person or any entity not authorised to have such access or use. So the coverage covers notification expenses, credit monitoring and data recovery expenses, cyber investigation defence costs and crisis management expenses. Just really important to note here, it's not a full-blown cyber liability coverage. It's a sublimited sleep easy coverage in case something happens and there's not coverage somewhere else, but it's not going to be a full cyber policy. If you've got an insured who is storing a lot of medical data, we would be recommending that they purchase a full-blown cyber liability policy because this one, coverage under the expense coverage here is just probably not going to cut the mustard. The next section is biological agents. Now, this is probably a little bit different again to something that you would normally see under a GL policy. There's two coverage components under this section. So the first one is medical monitoring expenses, which is caused by contact with or exposure to biological agents which are in the insured's products or which are used by the insured in their lab setting or manufacturing process. Similar thing, medical monitoring as the I've mentioned earlier under the other insuring clauses. And the second component is cleanup costs incurred by the insured to remediate any biological agents which have migrated beyond the boundaries of the insured's premises. So it's a little bit similar to a pollution liability coverage, but we're talking about biological agents. So there's a very big definition of biological agents within the wording, and it includes microorganisms, biological organisms, which are identified as or have the same characteristics identified as viral, bacterial, fungal, parasitic agents, and some other things that they're all defined in the biosafety and microbiological biomedical laboratories. So there is a definition within the wording of what the biological agents are, but it's probably the easiest way to remember it. It's very similar to a pollution liability, but we're talking about biological agents, not pollutants.
Nicole, I've just got a couple of questions come through. If I can just take you back to, I'll move it back if I can to 16. And you've mentioned a couple of times, yep, that's it, medical monitoring expenses. So is that when a clinical trial then says, okay, there's a 5% chance of, say, bad headaches that are a result of this, but it will monitor the complete cohort, so to speak, of the people in that trial.
Yes, correct.
And then
Correct.
that wouldn't really be available under a standard GL policy, would it?
No. And I don't think, sorry, your example wasn't really good because bad headaches is probably not a serious one, but if it was bad headaches that led to a brain tumor or something along those lines, then yes, that would be that sort of thing. So yeah.
I wasn't wanting to be too dramatic, but yep, that's fine.
Always
And then the other question that I've got through as well is about who's automatically covered under the policies with all of the different components and people involved.
Okay, so it's a pretty broad definition under the policies as to who's covered. So it sort of depends who's purchasing the policy as well. So if you've got a pharmaceutical company, they're going to be covered. If you've got if it's a clinical trial policy, the sponsor's going to be covered. But basically, there's automatic cover for product vendors. So if you've got people who are selling your products, there's automatic cover for those under the policy. When you're looking at your clinical trials and things like that, there's automatic cover for your life science contractors. So that includes clinical trial contractors. So if you've got someone coming in doing the clinical trial or individuals working on a clinical trial for you, they're automatically covered. Product sales contractors. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies or even device companies, their product sales reps are employed on a contractor basis as opposed to an employee basis. There's coverage for those automatically. And the same with product service contractors, they're automatically covered. If you're looking at clinical trials, ethics committees are automatically covered. So the ethics committees are the committees that approve the clinical trial and say it looks good, it's all okay, it complies with ethical guidelines. They're automatically covered as well under there. So, and then you've also got your estates, heirs, legal reps, your equipment leaseors, and the I was going to say the leaseors of premises, but that's equipment leaseors, and your lessor of your rental premises that you're leasing as well. So I'm sure I've forgotten some more. There's probably more there too.
Custom written for the specific industry. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll keep the other couple of questions for questions at the end.
Okay. So that's the main coverage sections that I've covered off there. We do have some other coverage sections in the policy, sort of like your inquiry costs and those sorts of things in there. I'm just conscious of time, but the other ones are fairly standard clauses that you would find in your GL wording or some of your PI wording. So if you've got any questions about anything else, you can just contact us and we can go through those with you. I just thought I'd quickly go over our capacity. So our capacity at the moment for the public and products liability is 20 mil for the GL, 10 mil for clinical trials, and 10 mil for errors and omissions coverage. So that is specific to the life sciences wording. If it's a product that comes in that will fit under our standard GL, we've got 50 mil capacity for that. Our standard PI wording is similar as well. If it's something that we think is more suited to the standard PI wording, we've got the 20 mil capacity there for that. And for medical malpractice, we've got the 20 mil capacity there as well. So, but yeah, under the life sciences, it's 20 mil for public and products, 10 mil for clinical trials, and 10 mil for the errors and omissions. So what do we need to actually provide you with a quote for under our life sciences policy? Pretty standard. We would love a proposal form. We would actually love a new business proposal form. All insurers do it. We have our renewal proposal forms as well, and they're very great. The insureds love it because they don't have to provide a heap of information. but it makes it really hard for us to assess a new business risk when it comes in. So if you do have a life sciences risk that you've got and you want to remarket, if you can ask your insured to fill out essentially a new business life sciences proposal form, that's going to make it a lot easier in the long run, and it's going to prevent us coming back and asking for some additional information that will be missing from the renewal proposal form. We're happy to look at our BIA proposal form. We can use some of the competitors' proposal forms. They're generally fairly similar. So details of the products and services to be covered. If you can't get your insured to complete a full proposal form and they only want to complete the renewal deck, it's really important to provide us with information about the products and services that are being covered, because the renewal decks don't really have that information. And if you can provide that information, it's going to save a lot of time for us having to research that individually and try to work out what products they're providing now, what products they used to provide, and all those sorts of things. If you are looking for clinical trial coverage, we really need to have a look at the clinical trial protocol. So for those who aren't aware, the clinical trial protocol is basically the guidelines that says what sort of individuals are going to be recruited to the clinical trial, what drug or device is being tested, how the protocol is going to be run, how many people are going to be recruited, where it's going to be, how long it's going to happen. So it just basically goes through everything that's happening with the clinical trial. And definitely required if you're looking at a clinical trial coverage. And the other thing that we need if you're looking at clinical trial coverage is the informed consent documentation. So any volunteer who enters into a clinical trial needs to sign an informed consent form, which basically says that the informed consent form details all the issues that could potentially arise from the clinical trial. It will tell the volunteer if there's benefits or negatives that are going to come out of that clinical trial, and the individuals need to be able to read that and sign it and say that they understand what is in there. So when we're looking at informed consent documentation, we're looking at information that's really easy to understand. So if their informed consent form and the information that's provided to the volunteer is very scientific in nature, that's going to be hard for a general person to understand what the potential effects could be on them if they participate in the clinical trial. So just as an example, under the FDA in the US, it has to be at a year 8 reading level. So year 8 at high school is sort of the basic level that they want there. It's not quite as strict here in Australia, but that's a sort of, if you've got any clients asking you about it, that's the sort of level you want to be aiming it at, because you want it to be as basic as possible to make it as simple to understand as possible for the people who are entering into the trial. So that is a really quick and fast overview of what's life sciences industry sort of risks are and what our policy covers. So I think I've left a little bit of time for questions, Matt.
And that's where I come into it, Nicole. Excellent. Thank you for all of that. Now, I've got a couple of questions here that are reasonably similar. So thank you, Gordon, Toby, and a couple of others there. So yes, we can do runoff cover. Maximum duration is similar to our standard runoff cover, which is 7 years. If indeed there's a requirement to extend that 7 years after the 7 years for another 7 years, that's fine. We can do that on a basis of in 7 years, we can extend it from there. Overseas trials, question was New Zealand risks. So New Zealand risks are definitely an appetite for us. That's combined with another question that was asked by Jim, I think, about North American risks. Nicole, did you want to chat about our North American capacities?
Yeah, so we actually, one of our sister companies, another company within the WL Berkeley Corporation Group, is actually Berkeley Life Sciences, and they operate out of the US. So if you've got someone who's got trials or they need that product coverage in the US, we can certainly refer you to some of our contacts there in the US to get that local placement there sorted and arranged. We've also got capacity in Asia, the UK, Europe and South America.
So a lot of those places also operate on an admitted policy basis. So if you're doing clinical trials in those countries, you would actually have to have an insurer registered to do clinical trial insurance in those particular jurisdictions. So North America being the US and Canada, and as Nicole said, through Asia there. A follow-up question. The clinical trials, Nicole, is written on a claims made basis, isn't it?
Yep.
Yep. And then the runoff basically can be run off the back of that as well.
Yeah.
I think that fairly much covers the questions there. Are we able to carry forward coverage for clinical trials previously commenced? So somebody else has done a clinical trial. We issue the policies on an annualized basis. So the answer to that question is yes. So if the clinical trial is in place or there's multiple clinical trials going on, then absolutely we do, and we'll provide the retro cover in the standard copying what or mirroring what the previous insurer gave. And yes, Samir, sorry about that. Yes, we are an excess capacity market as well. So happy to follow Chubb in the market. There's somebody that we're very comfortable with. We perceive that our policy is a little bit easier to read from a primary basis, but from an excess basis, absolutely happy to follow Chubb in that situation. And that's sort of one of the areas that we've looked at getting into the market, because it's always interesting getting into new markets. That's it from the questions there, Nicole. Don't have any other questions that have rolled through, and I'm fairly sure I've answered all those that have come through. So if anybody else has got any questions, put them in the Q&A. And now a little advert for our upcoming webinars. So we've got a webinar on the 23rd of October that deals with events, contractors and associations. So that's being conducted by our team that is our partner solutions team. So they handle all our binders and external parties that have got binding agreements with us. And then the Christmas party management liability / EPL claims. So rolling into the Christmas party period, we thought we'd have a bit more of a light-hearted look at some employment practices claims with shenanigans, shall we say, in Christmas parties and what goes on. And I've got a couple of funny little ones that will roll through there. So rather than have anything intensely educational or reading policy wordings or anything like that, we thought that we'd just really give a quick summary on or a good summary on some funny or entertaining EPL claims. So that one might be over 18 rated, I think. But pretty much everyone on this call is going to be over the age of 18, I would think.
That might be a good one to get some of your clients to watch as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome to get any of your clients to watch it if they're interested. It really is something that I'll run through some claims that we've had, but also some claims that have been litigated with a little bit of a view to the funnier or the more bizarre things that happen at Christmas parties as we lead into those Christmas parties. Nicole, thank you very much for your time today in the presentation. I think one of the things that Nicole was saying is definitely that the business that we're doing as far as clinical trials is concerned, or any of the medical procedures, speak to your Berkeley underwriter. They will either give you the solution that you're looking for. So whether that's under a clinical trials, whether it's under a life sciences policy, or whether it's under our standard GL or PI forms, that'll come straight back to you from your underwriter there. Excellent. Okay, well, we shall leave it there. Nicole, thank you again, and thank you to everyone for listening to us today. Glad we're able to give you some information, and hopefully we'll see you in some of those those other 2 webinars for the end of the year. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the day.